And we're back with our panel. Reihan, I want to start with you. Something Paul Manafort, Donald Trump's campaign manager, said to a group of Republicans meeting. He said, quote, "You'll start to see more depth of the person, the real person. You'll see a different guy," saying that Donald Trump is going to evolve. What do you make of that?
There was one indication of this when we saw Donald Trump's speech at AIPAC. He gave a speech that he had read from a teleprompter. He was very disciplined. He said basically all the usual things one would expect a Republican candidate to say. The trouble is that Donald Trump has done as well as he has because of his attitude, because of his ability to create excitement and energy. And I find it very hard to believe that he's going to be able to maintain that disciplined tone, because it's not really about policy issues. He's taken a dozen different policy stances over the course of his campaign so far. So I just find it very unlikely that Manafort is going to be able to discipline him in this way.
And does it work, Ezra? John Kasich said in sort of an interesting moment there, talking about a rival, he said, well, my negatives were really high. It takes a long time for them to go down. Usually politicians never want to admit their negatives are high. Donald Trump's are very high. Can he do anything? Could any politician do anything to drive down those negatives?
Well, there's always something you can do if you could become a very different person. The problem is it turns out to be extremely hard to become a very different person on the fly in the middle of a campaign, when you're tired all the time, when you're always in front of the cameras, when the media already has ideas and narratives about you that somewhat structure what they do and don't report. I always think it's actually quite funny, the idea that Trump is going to unveil a moderate part of himself. I remember him coming out and saying, if I'm elected president, I'll become the most politically correct guy you can imagine. A person who could make that kind of makeover of himself is not the person who comes out and says that aloud. He does not have the discipline to not say everything he's thinking, and as such, as Reihan says, attitudinally, he will not be able to offer the sobriety that I think codes for people as moderate, which is separate from policy positions that are moderate.
And what's fascinating, if you talk to people who are voting for Trump or who want him to win, it's either, I like that he says whatever he wants, that he's off the cuff, that he's totally impolitic, or they say, well, he may be saying those things, but he's not going to actually be that way when he's president. So even if he tries to change it, it may keep his base of support, but there's no reason to believe he's going to be able to grow his base of support if he makes those changes, because everyone else will say, well, we've seen what's been going on for the last 9 months.
I mean, here's the guy who says, I can be really presidential, just wait, and then turns around and says, well, if I were being presidential, none of you would be here. You'd all be so bored by me.
Right.
Yeah, that was very telling.
But isn't this, though, Reihan, what some people who have tried to warm to Trump have kind of hoped for, that he would be malleable? There was one quote from somebody on the Hill basically saying, the Republican leadership will tell him kind of what to do on a policy front, and he'll come in right behind that because he's a movable fellow. So isn't that what Manafort is essentially saying, is he said, we'll get to wherever you need us to get?
There have been a variety of interpretations and a variety of moments when people have thought that. So there's a time, several months ago after South Carolina, when you had Bob Dole and other, grandees of the party saying that, gosh, he actually might be a lot more sensible than someone like, say, Ted Cruz. He might be more malleable in these ways you described. And then that goes away. And then people, go silent. The people were saying that he could become more sensible in these ways. My sense is that he is going to try to build a brand. He's going to try to build excitement around the campaign. But beyond that, he is a rogue agent. And he also, by the way, how's he going to raise money? He's been promising that he's a self-funder this entire time. And the Democrats are going to have tremendous resources at their disposal. He has already alienated large numbers of major donors. There's a huge apparatus, not just the party, but around the party, that is not going to coalesce around him this time. So he is going to feel a need for that free media. And how is he going to get it?
That's right. And Nancy, his argument, he's going to have to find somebody to fund this general election because it's super expensive. But one of his big arguments is, I'm self-funded, I'm not bought and paid for. How's he going to fix that?
Well, he can put some more of his own money into it, and he is worth between $4 billion or $10 billion or however much he says he's worth that day.
Oh, he says 10. That's for sure. It's just other people may not.
Today it's 10. But he is going to have a huge problem, as Reihan said, raising money. The Koch brothers just today saying, they might even get behind Hillary Clinton before they get behind Donald Trump. And there's even a question of whether a lot of these big sponsors who you typically see at the convention will be there, or whether they will pull out because they don't want to be associated with the Donald Trump brand.
Where, Ezra, do you think the ultimate Trump convention argument is, which is about fairness? He basically says, I have the votes, I have the delegates. Whether I get the majority of delegates by this date doesn't matter. The fair thing to do would be to give me the nomination. How do you think he's doing in making that case?
I think it is going to be very hard to know how that's going to feel until we're right up at the convention. I've been talking to some of the other campaigns about this, and they're very confident, and they'll make the argument that, look, the only rule here is you need a majority of the delegates, and if not, it's anybody's game. And I think that this is a place where your rules conflict with your norms. What people are used to doing, what is going to feel normal to them, is to give it to the guy in the lead. To give it to someone else is going to feel at that moment, after that first ballot vote, like a tremendous, tremendous move. And I don't know how they're going to build the permission structure for those delegates to give it to Ted Cruz or to some outsider. So I think Donald Trump has a pretty easy argument here. The question is if he does something so offensive to those delegates that he's not ultimately able to make it.
And he'd better do it, because we don't have to think about this. We know, based on results yesterday, that these seats are continuing to get packed with supporters of Ted Cruz. It happened in Utah, Kentucky, Maine, Minnesota, and South Carolina, again, where you will vote on the first ballot for Trump if he won your state, but if there's a second ballot, they can switch very quickly and vote for Cruz. And that may not get him to 1237 on that second ballot, but it starts to make it nearly impossible for Trump to prevail.
This is the inside game
Right.
that Cruz has been winning that Donald Trump is so irritated about.
But it's looking less and less likely that this will even be something that plays out, because if you look at our battleground tracker, Trump is winning in Pennsylvania. He's leading in Indiana, which was looking like a state where the candidates could kind of blunt his momentum. I mean, if he stays on this trajectory, he can win the 1237 outright, and you don't get to a convention fight.
You can't win a fear-based campaign against Donald Trump in the primaries. You can absolutely win a fear-based campaign against him in the general election, and that is the fundamental dilemma. If you look at Sarah Palin, for example, running mates never matter, right? Except in 2008, a running mate did matter. She initially had enormous popularity. She seemed refreshing and new, but then suddenly people were questioning her judgment. They were questioning the fact that she was a heartbeat away from the presidency, and that was the one time when a running mate mattered. This time around, it's simply a matter of his being erratic, his seeming unreliable, his willingness to change positions at any moment. That is just going to be such a slam dunk, and just somehow Ted Cruz can't make that case. John Kasich can't make that case in the primaries.
John Kasich's been trying to make that case. He met with some delegates. He wouldn't tell us how the meeting went.
That's right. And this was in Pennsylvania, because you've got 54 people who get elected on Tuesday as delegates and don't officially have to declare their allegiance. The Cruz and the Trump campaigns trying to get some elected that would vote for them. Kasich says he's done it and wouldn't name names. He continues to make that argument he made to you that I can beat Hillary Clinton in a general election. It doesn't seem to matter. I think we are seeing echoes of 1964, as you mentioned. And look, he'll stick around. He'll get his votes. He's there if someone needs a running mate, perhaps, or if they do need a late ballot option. But beyond that, I was stunned. He could be running another gubernatorial-style campaign this week in Pennsylvania like he did up in New Hampshire to play second. He hasn't been doing it. He could be doing that in Indiana. He could have done it in Maryland. And over again, we just see him bouncing around to all these different states, making a few appearances instead of honing in on one or two places to actually get a win or pick up a big collection of delegates. He just hasn't done it.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. Thanks to all of you for joining us. And that's it. There's more from us, though, so stay with us.